When hikers go missing, most are found within hours, some after days. But when 66-year-old Lynda Largay vanished on the Appalachian Trail in 2013, no one expected what would come next. 2 years later, her remains were discovered deep in the Maine woods, just a short distance from where search crews had looked. But it wasn't her body that shocked investigators. It was the journal they found beside her. In her own handwriting, Lynda had recorded something no one could explain. She had survived for 26 days after going missing. This wasn't a story of instant tragedy. It was a slow, quiet wait for help that never came. Her words reveal what searchers missed, what systems failed, and how one woman, alone in the forest, left behind a story far more haunting than anyone expected. The discovery in the desert. In October 2015, a man working as a forest surveyor for a US Navy contractor stepped into a quiet section of the Red Maple Swamp area in Redington Township, Maine. His task that day was to measure tree growth and clear brush in a zone far off the main trail. He wasn't expecting to find anyone. This was deep, uneven terrain off the Appalachian Trail and rarely visited. But as he walked through the underbrush, he noticed something strange about 50 yards away, a grey nylon tent, zipped shut, partially sunken into the ground, surrounded by tall grass and low-hanging branches. The tent was silent, weather-worn, and collapsed inward slightly. A blue backpack and a pair of trekking poles rested nearby. Everything looked old, untouched. He called out, but there was no response. Slowly approaching the tent, he unzipped the front flap. Inside, he saw human remains wrapped in a sleeping bag. The body was skeletal, lying flat on its back. At first glance, it was impossible to determine who the person was or how long they had been dead. But there were no signs of a struggle, no scattered belongings, no visible wounds. It looked peaceful, like someone had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. Law enforcement and the Maine Warden Service were notified. Within hours, yellow tape surrounded the area. Investigators from the Maine State Police and a forensic anthropologist from the Office of Chief Medical Examiner in Augusta arrived the next day. The tent, the contents inside, and the remains were carefully removed and transported for examination. The area around the site was scanned thoroughly for additional clues, but no other human traces were found. What puzzled the authorities most was how the campsite had remained undetected for so long. Redington Township is remote, but not untouched. It sits along the Appalachian Trail corridor, a route traveled by thousands of hikers each year. How could someone stay in one place, in a tent just half a mile off the trail, and go completely unnoticed? The forensic team began working through the evidence. They found personal items in the tent, including a sleeping bag, clothing, a rain poncho, a water filter, food wrappers, a small stove, and most notably, a bound notebook and several handwritten pages sealed in a Ziploc bag. One of the documents was a rough will, signed and dated in 2014. The notebook appeared to be a journal with entries written in careful, steady handwriting. Though faded, the words were still legible. Each page chronicled daily events, meals, weather conditions, and internal reflections. Some entries were dated as late as January 2014, yet authorities initially believed the woman had died long before that. Dental records and a DNA sample were used to confirm the identity. The remains belonged to Lynda Largay, a 66-year-old woman from Brentwood, Tennessee. She had gone missing over 2 years earlier, on July 22, 2013, while hiking the Appalachian Trail. Her trail name was Inchworm. She had been hiking solo after her hiking partner returned home due to a family emergency. Largay had planned to meet her husband, George Largay, several miles ahead at a trail stop where he regularly resupplied her, but she never showed up. Search efforts at the time had been extensive. Over 100 volunteers, search dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging had been deployed across a wide area. Despite those efforts, no sign of Largay was ever found. She was presumed dead, and the case slowly faded from public memory. Now, more than 2 years later, her body had been discovered just 3.0 feet from the trail. Hidden by terrain and foliage, her final campsite had remained untouched all that time. The journal revealed even more surprising information. Contrary to what had been assumed, Largay had survived for weeks, possibly months after she went missing. Her entries recorded a daily struggle to stay alive, conserve food, and maintain hope. There were no signs that she had tried to destroy evidence or send out a final message. She seemed to believe that rescue was still possible. Officials from the Maine Warden Service later admitted that the area where her remains were found had not been searched thoroughly. They had focused on more likely routes, assuming she would have moved toward roads or shelters. Her tent had been less than a mile from one of the trailside maintenance roads used by forest workers. But because she had stopped and stayed in one place, she had evaded even the most advanced search operations. The story spread rapidly in the days following the announcement. News outlets reported not just on her death, but on the quiet determination she showed in her final days. Her family chose to release portions of the journal, though some entries were kept private. Investigators ruled out foul play. The cause of death was listed as starvation and exposure to the elements. No drugs, alcohol, or injuries were found. What began as a routine forestry inspection ended with the recovery of a lost hiker, a sealed tent, and a diary that quietly rewrote the assumptions everyone had made. Lynda Largay had not vanished into thin air. She had waited, written, and endured, alone in the woods until time, nature, and silence overtook her. Who was she? Lynda Ann Largay was born on June 14, 1947, and lived most of her adult life in Brentwood, Tennessee. She was known as a kind and thoughtful person, someone who enjoyed helping others and staying close to her family. Friends and neighbors described her as quiet, dependable, and deeply committed to her husband, George Largay. They had been married for over 40 years. Lynda had spent much of her life raising their daughter and volunteering in her local community. She wasn't someone who usually made headlines or took big risks. But as she neared retirement age, she wanted to do something she had dreamed about for years: hike the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail, often called the AT, stretches over 100 miles from Springer Mountain in Georgia to Mount Katahdin in Maine. It's one of the longest hiking-only footpaths in the world. Each year, thousands of people set out to hike all or part of it, but only a small percentage finish the entire trail. Lynda didn't plan to hike all of it in one go. Instead, she started with sections, moving slowly, step by step. She was 66 years old when she began the journey in April 2013. Her family and friends were proud of her, but also concerned. Hiking alone as an older woman, especially in remote areas, carries real risks. But Lynda was determined. She had trained for the trip and believed she could handle it. She began the hike with a friend, Jane Lee. They called themselves slackpackers, meaning they hiked long stretches of the trail without carrying full gear every day. Lynda had adopted the trail name Inchworm, a nickname that came from her slow but steady pace. She embraced the name with humor. Other hikers remembered her as cheerful and polite, always careful with her words and respectful of the trail. Even though she was slower than many others, she kept going, determined not to quit. Jane Lee had to leave the trail in late June 2013 due to a family emergency. From that point on, Lynda continued hiking alone. Her husband, George, followed her route by car, meeting her at planned spots to resupply her with food, clean clothes, and other supplies. They kept in touch by cell phone whenever she had signal. She carried a working phone, maps, and a spot GPS locator. But in one of the most critical moments of her hike, none of those tools would help. On July 21, 2013, Lynda spent the night at the Spalding Mountain lean-to in Maine. The next morning, she set out on the trail toward her next meeting point with George near the town of Stratton. She never arrived. When George didn't see her at the pickup spot, he waited. Hours passed. Then he called local authorities. That evening, a search effort began. At first, the hope was that she had simply gotten off trail and would find her way back. But as days turned into weeks and then months, the situation became more serious. During the search, officials discovered that Lynda's GPS locator was not with her. She had accidentally left it behind in a hotel room a few days before she disappeared. This detail, small at first glance, changed everything. Without that device, she had no way to send an emergency signal. In the dense woods of Maine, cell service is weak or non-existent in many places. She was essentially cut off from help. Despite a large-scale search involving helicopters, dogs, and hundreds of volunteers, Lynda was never found. Flyers with her photo were posted all along the Appalachian Trail. Other hikers were interviewed. Some recalled seeing her shortly before she vanished. She had asked for directions, saying she had gotten slightly off the trail, but no one reported anything unusual. She seemed calm and in control. Over the next 2 years, her family continued to hope. They held out for any new lead, any chance she had survived, found shelter, or been helped by someone off-grid. But as time passed, the trail went cold. Her name faded from the news. Hikers continued to walk the same woods she had disappeared into, never knowing she was still out there. What no one realized was that Lynda had not died immediately. She had managed to survive for weeks, possibly months, after becoming lost. Her training, determination, and will to live kept her going far longer than anyone had guessed. Her journal, later discovered in her tent, showed that she had kept a steady mind, writing daily entries about her condition, her surroundings, and her hopes. She wrote letters to her family. She rationed food, conserved energy, and waited for rescue. The woman many thought of as a gentle wife and mother had faced death alone, with calm and courage. She wasn't a trained survivalist or former soldier. She wasn't even a seasoned hiker, but she was steady. Like her trail name, Inchworm, she had moved forward slowly, but without giving up. The story of who she was only became fully known after her death. In her final days, far from home and out of view, she left behind a record of strength that no one had expected, but that all who read it would never forget. The trail registers. In the hiking world, trail registers are one of the most common and useful tools for both hikers and rescue teams. These are simple notebooks or logbooks placed inside metal or wooden boxes at key locations along the trail, often at shelters or trailheads. Hikers sign in, write the date, their trail name, their direction of travel, and sometimes a few notes about the weather or their experiences. It's a tradition that serves as both a guestbook and a way to track progress. For those who disappear on the trail, these little entries can become the only clues left behind. Lynda Largay, who went by the trail name Inchworm, made several entries in these trail registers as she moved north on the Appalachian Trail in the summer of 2013. Her handwriting was clear and consistent, and she often signed simply as Inchworm, Nobo, to indicate she was hiking northbound. Sometimes she included cheerful messages or short reflections about the day. These entries later helped investigators trace her steps in the days before she vanished. One of the last confirmed sightings of Lynda was on July 21, 2013, when she stayed at the Spalding Mountain lean-to in Maine. There, she signed the trail register. Her message read, "Inchworm, July 21, headed north, beautiful morning." The entry was simple, but it told investigators that she was still on course and in good spirits. Other hikers, who had stayed at the shelter, remembered seeing her. They said she was moving slowly, but didn't seem distressed. She was polite, quiet, and focused on the trail. The next planned stop for Lynda was near Route 27, where she was scheduled to meet her husband, George, for a resupply. That meeting never happened. When she failed to show up, George waited a few hours before calling for help. A search was launched, but early efforts had little to go on. Her trail register entries became one of the few tools available to narrow down her last known location. Over the next several days, search teams revisited shelters and lean-tos along the route. They opened the trail registers and flipped through the pages, looking for Inchworm. Her name appeared in multiple registers between the start of her hike and that final confirmed entry at Spalding Mountain. After that, nothing. She had signed no other registers. It seemed she had disappeared into the woods somewhere between Spalding Mountain and the Route 27 meeting point. What puzzled investigators was the short distance between those two locations, roughly 22 miles of marked trail. It was a challenging stretch, with thick forest, uneven terrain, and limited visibility. But it was not unusual for hikers. Many made the same journey every week. Still, something had gone wrong. Lynda had written in her journal that she had taken a wrong turn, become disoriented, and tried to backtrack. Her diary, found later in her tent, explained how she had attempted to send text messages, but never had cell service. She stayed near her campsite, waiting for help, but help never came. After her disappearance, other hikers came forward to say they had seen someone matching her description near the trail. One hiker recalled passing a woman who had asked if she was going in the right direction. The woman had seemed concerned, but not panicked. When asked why she didn't report it sooner, the hiker explained she didn't realize anyone was missing at the time. Only later did the face from that moment match the face on the flyers posted along the trail. The trail registers showed a pattern. Lynda had been methodical. She signed each register she came across. She followed the common practice of leaving a small trace to mark her journey. The fact that her entries suddenly stopped after Spalding told searchers one thing: she hadn't made it to the next shelter. Somewhere in that short but rugged section of forest, she had stepped off course. Though she was only a few miles from the trail, thick trees and uneven ground made her tent invisible to searchers on foot and in the air. The terrain made it easy to disappear. The last trail register entry became more than a note, it became a timestamp for her final day among others. After that, she was alone. Later, when her remains were found in 2015, rangers and investigators returned once again to those same trail registers. They flipped back to July 2013 and read each of her entries. The ink was dry, the pages slightly curled from moisture and time, but her name was there. She had followed the unwritten rule of the trail leaver record, even a small one. Her logs helped draw a faint dotted line through the wilderness, leading to the spot where the trail ended, not just in distance, but in silence. For Lynda Largay, those trail register entries were more than routine. They were quiet signs of life, scattered across the woods, waiting to be read long after her journey had stopped. The last known photograph of Lynda Largay was not taken by a journalist or part of any planned photo shoot. It wasn't even captured by her husband or family. It was taken by a fellow hiker along the Appalachian Trail in the days before she went missing. The image would become an important piece of the timeline, not just because it showed what she looked like near the end of her journey, but because it revealed how she was doing both physically and emotionally. The photo was taken sometime around mid to late July 2013. It shows Lynda standing beside her tent, near one of the trail shelters in western Maine. She is wearing a long-sleeved hiking shirt, pants, and a hat. Her backpack is close behind her, and a walking pole leans nearby. The background is forested, with tall trees and thick undergrowth, typical of that part of the trail. She is not smiling widely, but her expression is calm. She looks tired, perhaps thinner than when she began the trail, but she does not appear afraid or sick. The photo was shared with investigators after her disappearance, and it was later confirmed as the final known image taken of her while alive. Photos are usually a minor part of missing person cases, but in Lynda's case, this single picture helped confirm that she had continued hiking on schedule after being last seen at the Spalding Mountain lean-to on July 21, 2013. Investigators used it to verify witness accounts from hikers who said they had seen her after that date. It also gave the public a clear image of what she had looked like near the end, what she was wearing, the gear she carried, and the physical condition she was in. For weeks, that photo was printed on flyers, posted on trees, trail signs, and community boards all across Maine and beyond. The photograph also served as a quiet reminder of her determination. By the time it was taken, Lynda had been on the trail for over 3 months. She had hiked hundreds of miles through different terrain, including steep climbs, muddy sections, and areas with limited cell coverage. She had started the trail in April alongside her friend Jane Lee, and continued on her own after Jane left in late June. Her husband George met her at regular points along the way to bring her supplies, clean clothes, and encouragement. But in between those meetings, she was on her own. In the photo, there's a visible stillness. She stands in front of her tent, hands relaxed, as if pausing before packing up for another day. There is no dramatic expression, no pose. Just a moment frozen in time. For her family, that image became both a comfort and a sorrow. It showed her doing what she loved, challenging herself, embracing a journey that few attempt at any age, let alone at 66. But it also became a symbol of the last time anyone saw her in motion. When the photograph was shared in news stories, after her body was found in October 2015, it brought back many memories for people who had followed her story. Some hikers remembered meeting her in passing. Others had shared trail shelters with her, offering food or conversation. The image stirred something personal in many who had spent time on the Appalachian Trail. It reminded them of how easy it is to get lost, how quickly conditions can change, and how even experienced hikers can end up in trouble with one wrong turn. After her remains were discovered and her journal was read, the photograph gained even more meaning. Her journal showed that she had survived for at least 26 days after becoming lost. The picture showed a woman still strong enough to stand, to hike, and to hope. It became one of the few visual connections between the life she was living and the ending no one had expected. In a sense, it also became the last message. She left behind a quiet snapshot of resilience. Investigators confirmed that all the gear in the photograph matched what was found at the scene 2 years later. Her tent, sleeping bag, and backpack were all in good condition when they were recovered. They had not been damaged by wildlife or heavy storms. Everything was still zipped, closed, and neatly arranged. This supported what many already suspected, that Lynda had not panicked. She had stayed calm, stayed put, and waited for help, but no one found her in time. The photo remains one of the only lasting images of her final days. It doesn't tell the full story, but it tells enough. It shows a woman standing alone in the woods, facing forward, unaware that she was nearing the edge of the known path. She wasn't weak. She wasn't lost in spirit. She was simply alone, holding on to hope longer than anyone could have imagined. The photo doesn't ask for sympathy. It just asks to be seen just like she did. The forensic timeline. When the remains of Lynda Largay were found in October 2015, over 2 years after she went missing, the job of figuring out how and when she died fell to the Maine office of Chief Medical Examiner. The bones were found zipped inside her sleeping bag, inside a tent that had been sealed from the outside. There was no sign of trauma, no visible injuries, and nothing around the campsite that pointed to an attack or a fall. The scene was quiet and undisturbed, as if she had simply gone to sleep and never gotten back up. But the exact timeline of her death was far more difficult to piece together. Forensic investigators worked with what was left of her belongings and the condition of the remains. Since her body was found as mostly skeletal, with little to no soft tissue remaining, the process of determining a precise time of death became complicated. There were no organs to examine and no blood or tissue to analyze. Environmental exposure, weather, and time had erased much of the physical evidence that usually helps forensic teams build a clear timeline. Still, some clues remained. First, the location itself offered insight. Her tent was found deep in Redington Township, Maine, about 30 feet off the Appalachian Trail. The area was forested and uneven, with limited visibility from the air. Her campsite was tucked into a natural dip in the landscape, making it easy to miss, even with helicopters and search teams nearby. When she was declared missing in July 2013, extensive search efforts were launched, but no one had thought to look in that small area. Despite its proximity to the trail, her tent had been missed again and again. Once the remains were identified through dental records and DNA, the next challenge was determining when she had died. Based on her disappearance date, July 22, 2013, the initial theory was that she had gotten lost and likely died within a few days. That would have meant she passed away sometime in late July or early August. But when her journal was recovered inside the tent, everything changed. The journal, carefully sealed inside a Ziploc bag, contained several handwritten entries. The writing was steady at first, and then gradually weakened over time. The most shocking discovery came from the final pages, which were dated well into August and even into September. One of the last legible entries, dated August 6th, mentioned that she had run out of food. Another, written in shaky handwriting, appeared in late August or early September. There was no exact end date, but the writing stopped sometime around early fall. Forensic examiners couldn't use the bones alone to determine how long she had survived. However, her notes gave investigators something that bones couldn't, a timeline built in her own words. Her writing showed that she had remained alive for at least 26 days after she had gone missing. That meant she had survived through heat, cold nights, hunger, and complete isolation, all without the help of others. It also meant that the massive search effort, which had been called off after several weeks, had likely missed her while she was still alive. Other items in the tent helped support the idea that she had lived for weeks. Her food packaging, carefully rationed, was still inside the tent. She had organized her belongings into separate bags, including one marked, "Please find me." There were no signs of a struggle or panic. Her backpack, stove, water purifier, and maps were intact. Even her clothes were neatly folded. The scene was quiet and controlled. It was not the campsite of someone in panic. It was the final resting place of someone who believed rescue might still come. Environmental conditions also helped estimate the window of time. Maine summers are warm, but nights can be cold. As August turned into September, temperatures began to drop. Without consistent food, fire, or proper shelter from the cold, her body likely began to shut down. Experts believe that she died from a combination of starvation and exposure. The journal's last entries support this theory. Her handwriting became weaker, her sentences shorter, and then they stopped altogether. The Maine Medical Examiner's Office ruled her cause of death as inanition due to starvation and subsequent environmental exposure. Inanition is a clinical term that refers to the exhaustion of the body from lack of food. It was not an instant death, it was slow. The kind of death that takes place over days and weeks, not hours. The kind of death that leaves time for reflection, for writing, and for waiting. Lynda Largay's story might have ended quietly in the woods, but her final entries turned a presumed disappearance into a measured, documented survival. Her bones could not speak, but her journal filled in the silence. The forensic timeline, built from weather data, environmental clues, and her own words, revealed a reality far different from the early guesses. She had not died shortly after going missing. She had lived, waited, and hoped far longer than anyone knew. The journal appears, When searchers found the remains of Lynda Largay in October 2015, they also discovered a plastic Ziploc bag near her body. Inside it was a notebook. The bag had protected the pages from years of rain, snow, and changing temperatures. Despite the time that had passed, the writing inside was still mostly clear. The notebook was her personal journal. It didn't just document her days on the Appalachian Trail. It gave investigators, her family, and the public a window into what had really happened after she got lost. The journal showed something that shocked everyone. Lynda hadn't died shortly after she went missing on July 22, 2013. She had survived for at least 26 more days. Some entries even suggested she lived longer than that. She wrote clearly and regularly at first, describing what she was eating, how she was managing her supplies, and her thoughts each day. As the days passed, her handwriting became shakier and the entries shorter. Still, she kept writing until the very end. Lynda wrote about trying to send text messages for help, but she had no cell signal. She tried several times, walking a short distance from her camp and then returning. She didn't wander far. She knew that going deeper into unfamiliar woods could make things worse. Instead, she stayed put and waited, hoping a search team would find her. She knew they were looking. She had no idea that they had already searched the area and passed by without ever seeing her. The journal showed how carefully she managed her situation. She kept track of her food and water. She recorded when she ran out of food on August 6. That alone meant she had been alive for over 2 weeks after vanishing. After that, she tried to survive with no nutrition, relying on her own strength and the hope of being rescued. Her entries never sounded panicked. She wrote with calm and clarity. In one entry, she mentioned organizing her belongings and writing notes to her family. She wanted them to know she had tried. One of the most emotional parts of the journal was a note addressed to whoever might find her. It said, "When you find my body, please call my husband George and my daughter Kerry. It will be the greatest kindness for them to know that I am dead where you found me, no matter how many years from now." She signed it with love and even included their phone numbers. The note was written on a separate sheet of paper and placed in the bag with the journal. She knew there was a chance that no one would find her for a long time. She prepared for that. The journal helped investigators understand the mental strength Lynda had during her final days. She was completely alone in the woods, without food, without contact, and surrounded by deep forest. Yet she stayed organized and hopeful. She used her energy wisely. She didn't waste time or panic. She waited. Experts who reviewed the journal said it showed no signs of mental decline. Even after weeks without proper nutrition, her writing remained thoughtful. She never gave up completely. She just slowly ran out of strength, and when the entries stopped, it wasn't sudden. They faded out, gradually, like someone falling asleep. The last dated entry was in late August. After that, there were a few markings on the pages, but no more full sentences. The journal also confirmed that Lynda had tried to follow the correct safety steps. She had stopped moving once she realized she was lost. That's what most survival guides recommend. Moving too much can make rescue harder, but in this case, the advice didn't help. Searchers had passed within a few hundred yards of her camp, but never saw her. The thick trees and uneven ground had kept her hidden. For her family, the journal was both heartbreaking and comforting. It showed how much she loved them. She had written directly to them, explaining what happened, apologizing for the pain her disappearance would cause, and telling them she had not suffered a violent end. Her words gave them something to hold on to, proof that she had stayed strong, that she had tried, and that her last days were filled with quiet courage, not fear. After the investigation, the Largay family chose not to release the full contents of the journal to the public. Only selected lines were shared, mainly those already reported by news outlets. They said the rest was private. They believed Lynda's words belonged to her and to those she loved, Her journal was not just evidence, it was her final voice. In the end, that notebook changed the entire story. Lynda had not simply vanished into the woods and died. She had survived, waited, and left behind a record of her strength. Her journal became the single most important piece of the puzzle proof that she had endured long after others assumed she was gone. It told the part of her story that her body alone could not. Surviving the elements, Lynda Largay was not a trained survivalist. She was a 66-year-old woman from Tennessee who had dreamed of hiking the Appalachian Trail. When she set out in April 2013, she had prepared as best she could, reading books, training on short hikes, buying the right gear, and walking alongside a friend, Jane Lee, for part of the journey. But after Jane had to leave the trail in late June, Lynda continued on her own. That decision would test her in a way few people could have imagined. After she went missing in July, she didn't die right away. According to her journal, she survived for weeks, possibly more than a month, deep in the woods of Maine. Alone, without food, without help. The forest in western Maine is dense and unforgiving. The summer days can be hot and humid, but nights are often cold, even in July. By August and September, temperatures start to fall, especially after sunset. It's not unusual for hikers to need several layers to stay warm at night, even in the middle of summer. For someone without steady food and fire, those nights can be dangerous. But Lynda found ways to hold on. Her journal entries, recovered from the sealed plastic bag found near her remains, showed that she kept track of each day. She wrote about the weather, her rations, and how she was trying to stay warm. These were not frantic writings. They were clear and thoughtful, showing that she remained calm and focused even as the days passed, and her situation became more difficult. Her tent had been set up in a small clearing, well camouflaged by trees and brush. She had chosen a flat area that was dry and somewhat protected from the wind. Her sleeping bag and tent were found zipped, with her body inside. Her pack was neatly arranged nearby, with used food wrappers, empty water bottles, and her stove placed in order. Investigators said it looked like she had been waiting patiently for help. She had not panicked. She had not tried to move. She had stayed put, hoping she would be found. One of the hardest parts about surviving in the wild is staying hydrated. Lynda had a Sawyer water filter and was surrounded by natural water sources. She likely used nearby streams to collect water. But water alone cannot keep a person alive. By August 6, according to her own journal, she had run out of food. Before that, she had been rationing carefully small meals of protein bars, nuts, and other lightweight supplies. After the food ran out, she had no way to replace the calories she needed. Starvation begins slowly. At first, a person feels weak and lightheaded. Then they become tired, unable to walk far or think clearly. Eventually, the body begins shutting down. Muscles break down. Organs slow. But Lynda kept writing for many days after her food was gone, showing that her mind stayed strong even as her body faded. Without a fire, staying warm at night becomes even harder. No matches were found at the site. If she had them, she had used them early on. There was no sign of a fire ring or burned wood near the tent. She may have been too weak to collect firewood or unable to keep a fire going in the wet forest. Instead, she relied on her sleeping bag and clothing. Maine nights in August and September can drop into the 40s, sometimes lower. Exposure to cold without enough body fat or calories makes it hard for the body to stay warm. The combination of starvation and hypothermia is often deadly. Still, she lasted far longer than most would expect. Search and rescue experts were surprised by how long she survived. Many hikers become disoriented and make fatal mistakes within the first few days of being lost. They keep moving, panic, or try to hike their way out. Lynda did what she thought was right. She stayed in one place. She marked her location She left notes. She wrote in her journal. She did what she had been told to do, wait to be found. But the search teams had missed her. Even though helicopters and volunteers had searched the area, no one had looked in the exact spot where her tent was hidden. Trees, rocks, and thick brush had blocked her from view. Some of the final entries in her journal spoke about her family. She apologized to them for the pain her disappearance would cause. She asked that whoever found her make sure her husband and daughter knew what had happened. She seemed at peace with her fate, even though she had not given up until the very end. Surviving the elements is never just about gear or training. It's also about mindset. Lynda Largay faced heat, cold, hunger, and total isolation for more than 3 weeks. She did it alone, without anger or fear. Her strength was quiet. Her patience lasted longer than anyone could have expected. Her story became one not just of loss, but of survival against all odds. The tent that never moved. When Lynda Largay vanished from the Appalachian Trail on July 22, 2013, the search to find her began almost immediately. Her husband, George Largay, had been meeting her every few days at road crossings along the trail to resupply her with food and water. She was due to meet him near Route 27 in Stratton, Maine, but she never arrived. That was the last anyone heard from her. What followed was one of the most extensive search operations in Maine's history. Dozens of volunteers, trained rescue workers, helicopters, dogs, and search planes covered the trail and the surrounding forest for days and then weeks. But they found nothing. What no one realized at the time was that Lynda hadn't gone far from the trail. In fact, her tent was less than a mile from where search teams were operating. But it was hidden in a patch of thick woods, far enough off the trail to be invisible to even trained eyes in the air. The tent had never moved. It stayed in the same place from the moment she set it up until the day it was found, more than 2 years later. The tent was discovered on October 14, 2015, by a contractor working with the US Navy on land owned by the federal government. He was clearing brush and doing routine inspections when he noticed something unusual, what looked like an old, weathered tent in a small clearing, partly hidden by trees and leaves. Curious, he walked over and unzipped the flap. Inside, he found skeletal remains in a sleeping bag, along with neatly packed belongings and a sealed plastic bag containing a handwritten journal. It was clear this had been someone's final campsite. Investigators arrived quickly, and the area was secured. When they looked at the scene, they were struck by how orderly everything was. The tent had not been disturbed by animals. The flap was zipped. Her gear was placed with care food wrappers in one area, the stove nearby, her backpack and walking poles laid beside the entrance. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The tent had not been moved, disturbed, or opened since the day she passed away. This was a painful discovery for those who had searched for her. The tent had been there the whole time. Search teams had passed nearby, but no one had seen it. The dense forest, uneven terrain, and low visibility had kept it hidden. Even aerial searches using infrared sensors failed to spot it. The tent had blended into the landscape, and because she had stayed in one place, she left no trail for searchers to follow. The location of the tent was later mapped out. It was about 30 feet from the Appalachian Trail, just over half a mile. For an experienced hiker, that distance might not seem far, but for someone lost in unfamiliar woods, without a GPS, and with no cell signal, it was far enough to feel impossible. Lynda had tried to walk out. Her journal said she became disoriented and chose to return to her tent, thinking she had a better chance of being found if she stayed still. That decision, often considered the correct one in survival situations, became part of the tragedy. She had waited, just out of sight. The tent itself became a key part of the story. It was small, grey, and designed to be low-profile, lightweight, and meant for solo hikers. In normal circumstances, it was exactly the kind of gear a thru hiker would carry, but its color made it harder to see from the air, especially in the summer and fall when trees are full of leaves. It blended with the ground and the trees around it, especially when covered in pine needles, fallen branches and debris over time. Even if someone had been standing within 100 feet, they could have missed it unless they were looking directly at it. The fact that the tent never moved told investigators a lot. Lynda had not spent her final days wandering the forest. She had stayed put, rationing food, filtering water, writing in her journal, and waiting. She had hoped to be rescued. She had done what she believed was right. But because no one saw the tent, no one ever came. For her family, the discovery of the tent and the confirmation that she had stayed in that one spot was heartbreaking. It meant she had likely been alive while the search was happening nearby. She might have even heard helicopters passing overhead, but she had no way to make herself visible. She had written messages, left notes, even left a will. But those messages sat sealed in her tent, untouched, until the day someone finally walked close enough to find her. The tent that never moved became a symbol of how close she had been to help and how easy it can be to disappear in the woods, even just a short distance from the trail. It showed how silence, trees, and time can hide someone completely, even when they're waiting quietly to be found. The decision not to leave. Lynda Largay's journal made it clear she had tried to find her way back. After getting lost on July 22, 2013, somewhere between the Spalding Mountain lean-to and her scheduled meeting point near Route 27 in Stratton, Maine, she realized she had stepped off the Appalachian Trail. At first, she believed she could recover her bearings, but she didn't. As hours passed and the forest closed in, she made a decision that would shape the rest of her story. She would stop moving and wait to be found. In most survival training courses, people are taught that if they become lost, the best choice is often to stay in one place. It gives search and rescue teams a better chance of finding them. When a person keeps moving, they can travel further from the search area, making it harder to locate them. Lynda seemed to understand this. Her early journal entries showed she had thought through her options. She had walked for a while, tried to find the trail again, and even attempted to send text messages for help. But there was no signal, and she didn't have her Spot GPS device. It had been accidentally left behind in a hotel room before she entered that section of the trail. Faced with complete isolation and the reality that she couldn't get her bearings, Lynda returned to a small clearing in the forest. She set up her tent there. She began to write daily entries in her notebook. She described the weather, the supplies she had, and her thoughts. She noted the passage of time, and though the entries were quiet and calm, they all pointed to one fact: she had decided not to keep moving. She had chosen to stay put and wait for rescue. The spot she selected was only about 0 feet less than a mile from the trail. It wasn't far, but it was deep enough into the woods that no one could see her from the path. The area was covered in thick brush, tall trees, and uneven ground. Her grey tent blended in with the surroundings. It was the right kind of tent for a long-distance hike, lightweight and simple, but not easy to spot unless you were right next to it. As the days passed, Lynda continued to write. She kept track of her food. She made lists. She folded her clothing neatly and organized her belongings. She wrote messages for her family. One was addressed directly to whoever might find her body. She wrote that she hoped they would let her husband and daughter know what happened. She included their phone numbers. She signed the note with love. It was clear she understood the danger she was in, but she did not panic. Why didn't she try again to walk out? That question has been asked many times, but the answer becomes clearer when you look at the terrain around her camp. The forest in that area has few landmarks. It's easy to walk in circles. People who have studied lost hiker cases know that many get more lost the longer they try to self-rescue. Lynda had already tried and failed to find her way. The journal shows she had thought it through. She knew she was near where people would be looking. If she kept moving, she risked making things worse. It's also possible that after the first few days, her body began to weaken. Without enough food and with no way to start a fire, she would have begun to lose energy quickly. By the second week, even short walks would have become difficult. Starvation sets in quietly, slowly draining a person's ability to think clearly or travel far. Even if she had wanted to try again, she may no longer have had the strength. And then there was the waiting. For days and then weeks, Lynda believed that someone would come. Her journal shows hope. She continued writing long after her food had run out. She had no fire, no new supplies, and no contact with anyone, but she still waited. She had followed the rules. She had done what people are told to do in a survival situation, and that's what makes her decision even more heartbreaking. The search teams, although large and determined, missed her. They had passed within a few hundred yards of her tent, but they didn't see it. They were scanning large sections of trail, following hiker paths, and searching open areas. Her campsite was in a small dip in the land, a place no one expected her to be. Because she hadn't kept moving, she left no new tracks. There were no signs to follow. Her silence and stillness, meant to help her survive, had instead made her disappear. The decision not to leave her tent wasn't made out of fear. It was made out of logic and trust. Lynda believed someone would come. She believed the system would work. She believed she had done what she was supposed to do. And so she stayed, writing, hoping, waiting for the sound of voices or the sight of someone in the trees. That sound never came. In the end, the choice to stay where she was did not save her, but it did show her strength. She didn't panic. She didn't act recklessly. She faced the wilderness not with fear, but with quiet resolve. Her decision, written into her journal day after day, remains one of the most powerful parts of her story, the trail name and its meaning. When Lynda Largay set out to hike the Appalachian Trail in 2013, she chose a trail name like many others before her. On the AT, trail names are a long-standing tradition. They're often playful, sometimes serious, and usually given by other hikers based on something memorable about a person. These names become a second identity on the trail, a way to connect with others, to mark the journey, and to leave behind the world outside the woods. Lynda's trail name was Inchworm. It might seem like a small name, but it carried deep meaning. She didn't choose it because it sounded impressive or tough. She got the name early in her hike, and it came from how she moved. She was slower than most hikers. She wasn't in a rush. Her steps were steady, but small. Some of the younger hikers joked about it. Her pace reminded them of an inchworm, slowly making its way up a leaf. But instead of feeling embarrassed, Lynda embraced the name. She signed it proudly in trail registers, always followed by Nobo, short for northbound. In her journal, she sometimes referred to herself simply as Inchworm. She had accepted her pace, and more than that, she had made it part of her identity. On the trail, speed is often celebrated. Hikers compete to finish sections quickly or complete a through hike in record time. But not everyone is out there for speed. Some people walk the trail to clear their minds, to heal, to reflect, or simply to experience the quiet of the woods. Lynda was one of those people. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wanted to finish the trail her way, even if it meant taking longer, resting more often, and carrying a heavier pack to stay prepared. Other hikers who met her remembered her as polite and thoughtful. She didn't talk much about herself, but she always showed respect for the trail and for others. Her presence was quiet but steady. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't trying to stand out. Inchworm suited her well. The name also reflected something else about her: patience. Inchworms are small, slow creatures, but they still move forward. They don't give up. That's how Lynda hiked. Even when her friend Jane Lee had to leave the trail for a family emergency, Lynda kept going alone. She didn't quit. She kept inching forward, one shelter at a time, one day at a time. She met her husband George at road crossings every few days, and each time he resupplied her with food and clean clothes, she got back on the trail. Her progress wasn't fast, but it was steady. After she disappeared on July 22, 2013, the name Inchworm became more than just a trail nickname. It became the only name many people knew her by. Searchers looked through trail registers to trace her path. They looked for Inchworm in each logbook. Her last confirmed entry was at the Spalding Mountain lean-to. Inchworm, July 21, headed north, beautiful morning. That line helped narrow the timeline. It told search teams where she had last been seen and when. It told them she was still following her routine. Later, when her remains were found in 2015, and when her journal was recovered, the name appeared again. It was on her notes, on her personal messages. It was how she identified herself, even in her final days. To those who didn't know her personally, the name Inchworm was all they had. But those few syllables carried everything she had brought to the trail: her spirit, her determination, her quiet strength. Even her final note, written on a separate sheet of paper and left inside a Ziploc bag, was signed with that name. Inchworm. She asked whoever found her to contact her husband and daughter. She wanted them to know what had happened. She left her name, not the one from her driver's license, but the one from the trail. It was the name she had earned mile by mile, step by step. After her story became public, many hikers shared messages online about the name. They spoke about how much it meant. In a world where people often feel pressure to move fast and do more, Lynda's trail name reminded others that going slow isn't a weakness. It's just a different way to move. She had walked hundreds of miles on the Appalachian Trail. She hadn't quit, even when she was alone. She had faced her final weeks in the woods with the same steady pace she had always kept. The name Inchworm stayed with her to the end, and now it's how the world remembers her. Not just as someone who got lost, but as someone who kept going, someone who moved forward with quiet purpose through one of the most challenging journeys a person can take. The failed search efforts. The search for Lynda Largay began as soon as it was clear she hadn't arrived at her planned meeting point. On July 24, 2013, 2 days after she was last seen, her husband, George Largay, reported her missing when she didn't show up at their agreed location near Route 27 in Stratton, Maine. Lynda had been hiking the Appalachian Trail for months, making regular check-ins and meeting George for resupplies every few days. When she didn't appear, George knew something had gone wrong. The area where Lynda disappeared was in western Maine, a remote section of the trail near Reddington Township. This part of the Appalachian Trail is dense with forest and full of steep, uneven terrain. It's one of the most rugged and isolated stretches in the northeastern United States. Cell phone coverage is extremely limited, and the trails can become confusing, especially for someone unfamiliar with the specific turns and markers. Within hours of George's call, the Maine Warden Service launched a formal search. They were soon joined by the Maine Association for Search and Rescue, the US Border Patrol, and the Civil Air Patrol. Over the following days, the effort expanded to include more than 130 people at its peak. The teams used tracking dogs, helicopters, ATVs, and ground crews. Infrared imaging was used during aerial sweeps to try and detect body heat from above. Despite all of this, there was no sign of Lynda. Part of the difficulty was that no one knew exactly where she had gone missing. Her last confirmed sighting was at the Spalding Mountain lean-to on July 21. She had signed the trail register there under her trail name, Inchworm, and noted that she was heading north. That gave the search teams a starting point, but it wasn't enough. The next shelter north, the Poplar Ridge lean-to, never had her name in the register. So somewhere in that stretch less than 5 miles long, Lynda had gone off course. The teams covered miles of trail and combed the woods on either side. They checked streams, ravines, and steep ridges. They used scent dogs trained to track human odor. Helicopters flew grid patterns above the canopy, but nothing turned up. No gear, no clothing, no footprints, no broken branches. It was as if she had vanished completely. At one point, the searchers believed she might have left the trail and tried to reach a nearby road. They expanded the search zone to include logging roads, side paths, and unofficial trails that crisscrossed the area. Still, no trace of her was found. After a week, the daily search numbers began to drop. After 2 weeks, the organized effort began to scale back. By early August, officials had no new leads. What made the situation more frustrating was that Lynda had done what many lost hikers are told to do. She stayed in one place. After initially trying to find her way back, she had returned to a clearing in the woods and set up her tent. She remained there for over 3 weeks, writing in her journal and waiting to be rescued. But because she had gone off the Maine trail by about 3 feet, and because her tent was hidden by thick brush and trees, no one saw her. Even trained searchers walking nearby missed her location. Later, when the site was discovered in 2015, investigators were shocked by how close she had been to the original search area. According to GPS mapping, she had been within the zone they had looked at, but the dense forest and uneven terrain had created natural blind spots. Her grey tent blended into the surroundings. There were no sounds or signals to draw attention. The trees had silenced her presence completely. There were also challenges with the terrain itself. Western Maine is not only densely wooded, but the hills and valleys can confuse even experienced hikers. Fog and sudden weather changes are common. Trails twist and narrow, and some blazes on trees are faint or missing. In such a setting, a person can easily veer off the path without realizing it. And once they do, every step away makes it harder for anyone to find them. In the end, despite the size and urgency of the search, it failed. Not from lack of effort, but from the near impossibility of seeing through the forest. People who had walked within a few hundred yards of her tent never knew she was there. Dogs couldn't pick up her scent in the damp soil. Aircraft couldn't see through the canopy. And because she was doing exactly what survival guides recommend staying put, there were no fresh clues for trackers to follow. The failure left lasting questions for her family and for those who searched. Could more have been done? Was the area covered thoroughly enough? Should search grids have gone farther off trail? These questions still linger, but at the time, the teams believed they had done all they could. They had looked where they thought she would be, they just hadn't looked exactly where she was. Food, fire, and rationing. When Lynda Largay set up her tent deep in the woods of western Maine in July 2013, she believed she would be found soon. She had gone off the Appalachian Trail unintentionally, likely after stepping onto a side path or becoming disoriented by the forest. But instead of trying to wander her way out again, she chose to stay put and wait for help. It was a logical choice for a lost hiker. She believed that rescuers would come, and she needed to survive long enough for them to find her. That meant stretching every bit of her supplies as far as they could go. Lynda had been well prepared for a long hike. Before beginning her journey, she and her husband, George, had planned careful supply drops. Every few days, she would meet him at a road crossing to get more food, clean clothes, and other essentials. But after July 22, when she got lost, there would be no more resupply. Everything she had in her backpack at that moment was all she would have until the end. The journal found in her tent showed she understood this quickly. Her entries didn't just mention dates and thoughts. They included quiet signs of her planning how much food she had, how long she could stretch it, what her daily intake might look like. There wasn't much detail in the journal about exact meals, but it's likely she was carrying high-calorie hiking foods, trail mix, granola bars, dried fruit, and perhaps some freeze-dried meals or oatmeal packets. These are typical for long-distance hikers and are easy to carry, but food runs out quickly when you're alone in the woods. Even if she had rationed strictly, eating only 1 or 2 small meals a day, it's unlikely her supplies would have lasted more than a week or two. Based on the contents found in her pack and the general calorie needs of someone hiking daily, even if she stopped walking, her body would have begun to weaken after about 10 days without proper food. After that, she would have entered starvation, relying on body fat and muscle to keep going. The forest around her wasn't a reliable source of food. Lynda wasn't trained in wilderness survival beyond her hiking experience. She wouldn't have known which plants were safe to eat, and there were no tools to trap animals or catch fish. The terrain was not rich in easy resources. There were no nearby berry bushes, and it was too late in the season for edible mushrooms. Drinking untreated stream water was possible, but food was another matter entirely. Fire would have been the next challenge. In most camping situations, hikers carry small stoves or fire-starting kits, but the materials discovered at her campsite showed no signs of a fire being built. There were no blackened stones, no ashes, no logs arranged in a circle. It appeared she had not been able to start a fire at all. Without fire, she couldn't cook, boil water, or keep warm at night. Nights in the Maine woods, even in summer, can drop to uncomfortable lows. Without a heat source, a person must rely entirely on sleeping bags and clothing to retain warmth. Fire also provides light and psychological comfort. Sitting in total darkness can break a person's sense of safety. But Lynda had kept calm. Her journal showed no signs of panic, even in her final days. She didn't write about being afraid of animals or the dark. She wrote about her husband, her daughter, and her hope of being found. She tried to stay mentally focused even as her body grew weaker. As the days passed, her strength would have dropped. Without food, the human body begins to shut down gradually. Thinking becomes harder. Movement feels heavier. The ability to make decisions declines. Despite this, she continued writing. This shows she remained conscious and organized long past the point many people would have lost focus. She made lists. She folded her clothing. She placed important information in sealed plastic bags for searchers to find later. These were not the actions of someone who had given up. Eventually, when her body no longer had enough energy to function, she lay down in her tent. The final entry in her journal is dated August 18, 26 days after she went missing. That meant she had survived for nearly a month in the forest, alone, without new food, without fire, and with no contact from the outside world. She had rationed everything she had: food, energy, time, until there was nothing left to give. Later analysis of her campsite showed she had used every item wisely. Her gear had been placed neatly. There were no signs of waste. Food wrappers had been stored in bags, and her items were protected from animals and rain. She had prepared for each day as best as she could, hoping each morning that it would be the one when someone found her. The way she rationed her supplies and managed her shelter was not reckless. It was deliberate. She had not panicked. She had made calm decisions each day, based on the belief that rescue was coming. Food, fire, and rationing became the quiet rhythm of her survival, and ultimately her story. The psychology of isolation. When Lynda Largay became lost in the Maine wilderness on July 22, 2013, she wasn't just facing the physical dangers of being alone in the forest. She was also facing the mental toll of isolation. In the beginning, she may have felt hopeful, even confident, that she would soon be found. But as the days passed and no one came, the psychological weight of solitude would have started to grow heavier. Lynda had always been a calm, organized person. People who knew her described her as steady and thoughtful. She had prepared well for her hike, trained ahead of time, and taken her role on the Appalachian Trail seriously. Even when she adopted the trail name Inchworm because of her slow pace, she embraced it without embarrassment. She didn't mind going slowly, as long as she was going forward. But once she became separated from the trail, forward movement stopped. She made the choice to stay in one place and wait for help, and that meant facing the days and eventually weeks completely alone. The human brain is not built for extended isolation. Even people who are mentally strong can struggle when they have no one to talk to, no schedule to follow, and no way to measure time besides the rising and setting of the sun. Lynda's journal showed that she was aware of this. She made a point to keep writing, to track the date, and to note her thoughts. This small act likely helped her stay grounded. Keeping a routine, even a simple one, is known to reduce the mental effects of isolation. It gives the mind structure when everything else feels uncertain. Still, the psychological challenges she faced would have grown over time. After the first few days, she would have begun to question whether anyone was actually coming. She had tried to send text messages from her phone, but there was no cell signal. She did not have her GPS tracker, which had been left behind in a hotel room by accident. She was off trail, surrounded by dense trees and uneven ground. She may have heard helicopters overhead or distant sounds of searchers, but no one ever saw her tent. That kind of near contact without rescue can be emotionally crushing. Studies of survival psychology show that hope is often what keeps people going. Lynda seemed to hold on to that hope for as long as possible. Her journal entries, which lasted for at least 26 days, never descended into fear or despair. She stayed focused, she rationed her food, she organized her belongings, she made lists. She wrote a final note with her family's phone numbers and asked that whoever found her tell them what happened. These actions show a clear mind, even as her body was failing. But the mental toll of not knowing if she would ever be found must have weighed on her. The forest can feel endless when you are alone. The sounds of birds, wind, and animals grow louder when there is no human voice to balance them. Every creak of a tree branch becomes a signal to listen for. Every rustle in the brush might be a person or not. Time stretches and loses shape. Days feel longer. Nights are colder and quieter. This kind of silence is not restful. It presses in. It reminds you that you are alone. Despite this, Lynda kept her mind steady. Experts say that people who survive long periods of isolation often share one quality. They maintain a purpose. For Lynda, the purpose may have been simple: stay alive until rescue. Or perhaps it became something deeper: leave behind a clear record so that her family would have answers. Her journal was protected from the elements in a Ziploc bag. Her note was carefully written. She did not scribble or scratch out words. She was deliberate. The lack of fire would have made the nights even harder. There was no light, no warmth, no movement to distract her, just the dark and the quiet. But she didn't leave her tent to wander or panic. She remained there, day after day, hoping. That kind of mental discipline is rare. It's even more impressive when you remember she was 66 years old and dealing with physical exhaustion. The moment when a person accepts they might not be rescued is one of the hardest parts of isolation. It's the shift from waiting to preparing for the end. Lynda's final messages suggest she reached that moment. But even then, she did not give in to fear. Her note asked for kindness to inform her family, to carry her story forward. That clarity, after nearly a month alone, is striking. Lynda Largay's experience shows more than just the dangers of getting lost. It shows how strong a person's mind can be, even in the most silent and isolated corners of the world. She didn't let the forest take her spirit. She held on, with quiet strength, until the very last day. The missing GPS device. When Lynda Largay disappeared in the Maine wilderness on July 22, 2013, many people who later followed her story wondered the same thing. Why didn't she have a GPS device? It seemed like something that could have saved her life. As it turns out, she did own one, but in a twist that would haunt the investigation, the device had been accidentally left behind in a hotel before she ever entered the woods that day. Lynda was not reckless. In fact, she was known to be cautious and careful. Before setting out on her Appalachian Trail journey, she had trained, prepared her gear, and arranged regular checkpoints with her husband, George. She was hiking with a partner, Jane Lee, for most of the journey until Jane had to leave due to a family emergency. Lynda chose to continue on alone. That was a difficult decision, but she wasn't entirely unprepared for it. She had maps, a working phone, and a GPS tracking device. The GPS was a DeLorme inReach, which not only provided location data, but also allowed for text messages via satellite, especially helpful in areas without cell service, like much of rural Maine. The plan had been for her to carry the GPS for emergencies, especially in remote parts of the trail. It could send a distress signal, transmitting her coordinates to emergency services, even if her phone didn't work. But when she left the Comfort Inn in Maine on July 21 or 22, she accidentally left the device behind. It was not in her pack. It was not on her person. It was found later, still at the hotel. This single oversight turned out to be critical. Without the GPS, Lynda had no way of sending a signal when she realized she was lost. Her cell phone had no coverage in the thick woods of the Reddington Township area. She tried sending text messages to her husband George, but none were delivered. In one of her attempts she wrote, "In some trouble, got off trail to go to BR, now lost. Can you call AMC to see if a trail maintainer can help me? At some point, lost footpath." That message, stored on her phone, was never transmitted. No one knew she was missing until George reported her absence 2 days later, after she failed to meet him for a scheduled resupply. Had she carried the GPS, things might have unfolded very differently. She could have activated the emergency beacon. Her location could have been pinpointed. Search and rescue teams would not have been combing miles of dense forest without direction. They would have known where to look. Instead, the search had to rely on physical sightings and the last known logbook entry at the Spaulding Mountain lean-to. That placed her somewhere between Spaulding and Poplar Ridge, a rugged 5-mile stretch of trail surrounded by deep forest, ravines, and poor visibility. The GPS device wasn't just a locator, it was also a communication tool. The DeLorme inReach allowed the user to send short text messages through satellite. Even if she had been unable to press the emergency SOS button, Lynda could have used it to describe her surroundings, her condition, and her estimated location. She could have responded to search teams if they got close. Instead, she waited in her tent, hoping to be found, writing in her journal each day, marking time until she grew too weak to continue. The GPS was later recovered at the hotel during the investigation. Its unused state confirmed that Lynda had never had it with her after that morning. No signals were sent. No location history could be pulled from it during the time she was missing. It remained in the room, untouched, as the largest search in Maine's history unfolded just a few dozen miles away. George Largay later spoke about the mistake publicly. It wasn't about blame. It was just one of those tragic errors that only becomes clear in hindsight. In all their planning and double-checking, something had slipped through. In a world filled with gear, lists, and check-ins, one small item had been left behind, and it made all the difference. Her journal showed that she remained hopeful for much of her time in the woods. She expected to be found. She had no reason to believe that help wouldn't come. But the rescuers had no way of knowing where to look. They were scanning miles of forest with no signal, no fresh tracks, and no clue that she was quietly surviving less than a mile from the trail. The GPS device became a symbol of what might have been. It was a piece of technology that in almost any other scenario would have worked. But on that day, in that place, it was just a piece of forgotten gear sitting on a hotel nightstand. And because of that, Lynda was left alone in the forest, with only her thoughts, her journal, and the hope that someone would still find her in time. Bureaucracy and blind spots. The search for Lynda Largay showed how even the most organized rescue operation can run into failure, not from a lack of effort, but from small mistakes, blind spots, and breakdowns in communication between agencies. The initial response to her disappearance was swift. On July 24, 2013, just 2 days after she was last seen, the Maine Warden Service launched a full-scale search in the Redington Township area. They knew she was supposed to meet her husband, George Largay, near Route 27. When she failed to show up, the alarm was raised quickly. But despite a massive search effort involving helicopters, scent dogs, volunteers, and trained personnel, no one found her. The failure wasn't due to people not caring. In fact, it was one of the largest searches in Maine's history. Hundreds of people participated. But from the beginning, there were gaps in how the information was collected and how the area was searched. These gaps weren't intentional. They were built into the structure of the system. Different agencies had different roles, and sometimes they didn't share everything with each other. This led to decisions that, in hindsight, may have cost valuable time. One of the biggest blind spots came from assumptions. Early on, search leaders believed Lynda had likely continued northward on the Appalachian Trail and might have become injured or disoriented along the marked path. They focused on that assumption and built their search pattern around it. But Lynda had actually stepped off the trail to use the bathroom, a common practice for hikers, and got turned around. She tried to find her way back, but went in the wrong direction. Eventually, she ended up deep in the woods, about 200-300 feet east of the trail, near a dry stream bed. This distance sounds small, but in dense forest, it's enough to make someone invisible. Still, it's close enough that searchers should have had a chance of spotting her, especially with helicopters and thermal imaging. But the way the search grids were drawn didn't include the exact spot where she camped, and some areas, like steep ravines and thick brush, were skipped because they were seen as unlikely or too dangerous to send teams into at the time. Another issue was related to the trail registers. Lynda had signed the register at the Spalding Mountain Lean-To on July 21, using her trail name, Inchworm. But that information didn't immediately reach everyone on the ground. Some search teams didn't know her exact last known location. It wasn't until later that the search was narrowed down to the 5-mile section between Spalding and the next shelter, Poplar Ridge. By then, valuable time had passed. The search also involved multiple groups, including the Maine Association for Search and Rescue, the US Border Patrol, Civil Air Patrol, and volunteers. While each brought their own tools and expertise, there was no single system for coordinating every detail. Each team reported to a central command, but communication delays sometimes meant that one group was searching an area another had already cleared. With no sign of Lynda found during those early sweeps, there was a growing belief she had wandered much farther off or been picked up by someone. The truth was simpler. She had stayed in one place and remained hidden in plain sight. Later, analysis revealed that a US Navy survival instructor had been brought in during the search. He recommended that dense side areas off the trail be searched thoroughly. But not all of those areas were checked, especially the one where Lynda's body was later found. Some reports say the search command believed she wouldn't have travelled into terrain that difficult, especially alone and at her age. That assumption turned out to be wrong. The technology available at the time was another limiting factor. Cell phone pings were attempted, but were unreliable in that region. Searchers used aircraft with infrared cameras, but the tree cover was too thick. Dogs were brought in, but they may have missed her scent due to wind direction, moisture, or terrain barriers. Still, even with those challenges, being just half a mile from the trail and still not being found raised tough questions about the effectiveness of the search grid and the prioritization of areas. By the time her remains were discovered in October, 2015 by a forestry surveyor, more than 2 years after she went missing, the realization set in that she had been within the original search area all along. Her tent and remains were just outside one of the designated search zones. A red backpack, her tent, and a zipped plastic bag containing her handwritten journal were found intact. Her final note was dated August 18, showing she had survived 26 days. Afterward, the Maine Warden Service defended its actions, saying the search was conducted according to national standards. Still, others, including some experienced hikers and search experts, questioned whether those standards were enough. The tragedy became a case study in how small bureaucratic choices, miscommunication, and assumptions can lead to large consequences. Lynda Largay had done many things right. She stayed in place, left clues, and tried to signal for help. But the systems meant to find her had too many blind spots, and in the end, they passed her by. The final pages. The last pages of Lynda Largay's journal are some of the most haunting parts of her story. They offer a rare and deeply personal view into what she was thinking and feeling during the final days of her life. The journal was found inside a Ziploc bag, carefully protected from the weather, alongside her body and tent. Though her remains were not discovered until October 14, 2015, the words in her handwriting made it clear she had survived much longer than anyone believed possible, 26 days in the wilderness, after getting lost on July 22, 2013. Her final journal entry was dated August 18. That single date overturned years of assumptions about how long she had been alive. Early forensic estimates had suggested she may have died within a few days of becoming lost, but her journal proved otherwise. She had not only stayed alive for weeks, but she had stayed mentally clear and aware enough to record each passing day. The entries weren't long, but they were focused. Lynda wrote down details that she felt searchers might need to know. She gave directions to her tent's location. She left notes with her family's contact information. She wanted to make sure that, if she didn't make it, someone could tell her loved ones what happened. There was no panic in her words, no evidence of irrational thinking. Her tone remained calm and measured, even as her physical condition declined. One of the most powerful pieces of writing was a note she wrote specifically for whoever might find her. In that message, she included the following request: "When you find my body, please call my husband George and my daughter Kerry. It will be the greatest kindness for them to know that I am dead where you found me, no matter how many years from now." That sentence showed that she had accepted what was likely going to happen. She knew rescue might not come in time, and yet she remained composed. She also asked that whoever found her body take special care to communicate with her family in a gentle and thoughtful way. She didn't want them to be left wondering. She knew that not knowing is often the hardest part for families of missing persons. She wrote with them in mind, not with fear or anger, but with love and clarity. In the final pages, there were also references to her attempts to stay alive. She had tried to send text messages on her phone, but they never went through. She wrote that she had run out of food and was becoming weak. The tent was still intact, and her belongings were neatly organized. Her sleeping bag was inside the tent, and her backpack and other gear were placed nearby. There was no sign of panic or chaos in her camp. She had remained in the same location for the entire 26 days, trusting that someone would eventually find her. Despite her declining strength, she continued to make entries in her journal. Even when she could no longer walk far or search for help, she could still write. That act alone may have given her a sense of purpose. Many survival experts say that having something to focus on, even something as simple as keeping a journal, can make a difference in how long someone is able to survive. It keeps the mind active and focused, even when the body begins to weaken. Lynda's final entries are not dramatic. They are quiet. They are filled with small details and reminders of her love for her family. She didn't write about fear or regret. She didn't write complaints. She wrote about being lost and about her hope that someone would find her in time. And when she began to believe that might not happen, she made sure her story would still be told. The last page of the journal was dated August 18. After that, there were no more entries. It's not clear how many days she may have survived after that date, but the lack of further writing suggests she was either too weak or had already passed. She was 66 years old, and though she had no serious medical issues, the lack of food, water, and warmth had taken its toll. When her remains were found more than 2 years later, the journal was key to understanding what really happened. It revealed the timeline. It revealed her actions. But more than anything, it revealed her strength. Lynda Largay had been alone, deep in the Maine woods, for nearly a month. She was surrounded by silence and uncertainty, yet her final pages were filled with order, with love, and with a quiet bravery that left a deep impression on everyone who read them. Those last words made sure she wasn't forgotten. They gave her family peace. And they gave the world a glimpse of someone who, even in her final hours, never let fear write her story. What the diary changed. Before Lynda Largay's journal was found, most people believed she had died within a few days of getting lost. That belief shaped the way people viewed the case. Many assumed she had made a wrong turn, wandered into the forest, and quickly succumbed to the elements. Her disappearance had been a mystery, and even with extensive search efforts, no one had found her for over 2 years. But in October 2015, when her remains were discovered, her diary changed everything. The journal was stored in a clear plastic Ziploc bag and was still legible despite having sat in the woods for more than 2 years. Her tent and belongings were located just over half a mile from the Appalachian Trail in Redington Township, Maine. It wasn't far from where she had last been seen. The small notebook she kept revealed a completely different version of events than what investigators had believed. The most important detail was the date of her last entry, August 18, 2013. That meant she had survived for 26 days after going missing on July 22. Until that point, the timeline of her death had been based on limited physical evidence and assumptions. Her bones were found scattered, her sleeping bag still inside her tent. The original belief was that she had died just a few days after becoming lost. But her own words showed that she had managed to survive much longer, waiting in the same spot, hoping to be found. This discovery had a major impact on the case. First, it shifted the focus from how did she get lost to why wasn't she found? Search and rescue teams had been in the area while she was still alive. Helicopters, search dogs, volunteers and professionals had combed the forest for weeks. But no one had spotted her tent. No one had heard her calls for help. Her campsite had been set up in a small clearing behind a cluster of trees near a dry stream bed. It was just outside the primary search zones. The diary confirmed what some experts had feared, that she had stayed in one place, done what survival experts recommend, and still hadn't been located. For her family, the diary brought both comfort and heartbreak. It showed that Lynda had remained calm, even as her situation became more serious. Her writing was clear, thoughtful, and practical. She left messages for George, her husband, and for her daughter Kerry. She recorded the days and left instructions for whoever found her body. She wanted her family to know that she had tried everything she could and that she had kept faith that someone would come. That knowledge gave her family some peace, but it also raised painful questions. If she had survived for nearly a month, why hadn't the search teams gotten to her in time? After the diary became public, many people began to look at the search differently. Some questioned the way search zones were drawn. Others pointed out that decisions had been made based on assumptions about her abilities, her direction of travel, or the belief that she would keep moving. but she had done the opposite. She had stayed put. That decision is usually considered the safest when lost in the woods, especially for someone unfamiliar with the terrain. It minimizes the risk of injury and increases the chances of being found in one spot. But in Lynda's case, it hadn't worked. The diary also renewed conversations about how technology is used in backcountry travel. Lynda had accidentally left her satellite GPS device in a hotel room. That device, a DeLorme InReach, could have sent her location via satellite, even without cell phone service. She had a cell phone with her and tried multiple times to send text messages, but none went through. The diary entries confirmed that she was trying to communicate and that she believed help could still reach her. Survival experts later studied the diary to understand how she stayed alive so long. She rationed her food, stayed sheltered, and avoided panic. Her mental clarity, even after weeks alone, impressed many. The entries were not the words of someone who had given up. She wrote with care, leaving behind a record not just of her survival, but of her effort to help others understand what had happened. In the end, the journal became the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. It told the real story. It showed how close she had come to being rescued, and how a combination of small errors, assumptions, and missed chances had cost her life. It also ensured that her voice was not lost. She had written down her truth, and that truth outlasted the silence of the forest. Her diary made sure the world knew what really happened, and in doing so, it gave meaning to everything she endured.